Hey Sam, saw your question on Facebook, and rather than try to type out a super long answer, I thought I'd do this video, so hopefully this helps. So this is just my opinion. Again, I'm not a band director. My degree is in music education. I've taught private trumpet and brass lessons for years, married to a band director. But these are just kind of my opinions, maybe more from the player and the retail side of things for what it's worth. So your first question is what's the best brand of brass instruments? You've gotten several great suggestions that basically say, hey, if a quality local music store is supporting this or offering it, it's going to be a good instrument. I'd back that up, okay? And obviously, you're in Joplin, you're using Ernie Williamson Music, quality music store, in my opinion, not that I'm biased. But any of the instruments that we sell or rent, we have to stand behind in service. So, and you think about so many of our instruments are in a rental pool that they get rented and come back. We're looking for instruments that help kids have success, that are as affordable as possible for the quality, and then also will be made well enough. They will last for a long time. So, I think your local music store, best option for that. In my opinion, I would avoid any of the instruments that you typically see in the mass merchandisers, online sales marketplaces, stuff like that. What size mouthpiece should they start on? All right, let's just open the can of worms right off the bat, right? So my opinion on this, that the mouthpiece that comes with the instruments is fine. Talking specifically for brass players. They're not a beginner mouthpiece. There's no such thing as a beginner mouthpiece. When we think of a brass instrument mouthpiece, we really have two main variables that are affecting the student. You have the diameter of the rim, so the diameter of the mouthpiece. That's represented by the number on the mouthpiece in most cases when we're thinking like a box-style mouthpiece. Then you have the cup depth. That's represented by the letter. So when band directors talk about different mouthpieces, should they start on a 7C? Should they start on a 5C? Should they start on a 3C? It's the exact same cup depth that we're talking about, the Bach C cup, but we're talking about a different rim diameter, and it's slightly different. So the 7 is just a touch smaller than the 5, which is a little bigger, and the 3, which is a little bigger still. But for a beginner, they don't have the developed musculature, breath support, or anything for it to really matter. And so the smaller mouthpiece rim actually can aid them with their range and everything else. It's not going to really hurt their tone. None of this is going to matter. Speaking of tone, I don't know if this is one of the questions, but I'm just going to cover this real quick. Like when we think of trumpet, for example, the trumpet should sound like a trumpet. Okay? It should not sound like a French horn. It should not sound like a cornet even. It should sound like a trumpet. There should be some brilliance to it, to the sound and everything else. So you don't want this dark, dull sound. I think a lot of times band directors think, well, I want my trumpet players to get a 3C because they get a better sound. And by better sound, what they mean is the sound is darker. But one of the reasons the sound is darker is because the player is not playing it as efficiently. And so they're playing actually very inefficiently, which is making it harder for them. So for trumpet, I would stick with 7C. With trombone, I'd stick with 12C. And in the beginning, it's totally fine. For many players, based on the size of their lips and mouth, then they may need a larger mouthpiece. But in the beginning range player, this doesn't matter. So maybe as they get older, 7th, 8th grade, this might be something we want to look at, maybe a slightly different mouthpiece possibly. But a lot of professionals have played on 7C and 12C size mouthpieces their entire career. So the idea of like a 7C being a beginner, throw that idea out. It's not accurate. So starting on French horn or switching players later in the year, I would encourage you to start them on French horn if you can. A French horn is its own instrument, and so the sooner you get started playing your instrument, the better off you are. And then should it be double or single? You ask any horn professor, or I've asked several horn professors, and they all say start them on double. Like a double horn is really a different instrument than a single horn. You should just start them on the double from the very beginning. Okay? For what it's worth, Ernie Williamson Music does rent double French horns. Then you mentioned, you asked, do students have tuners on their stands to learn what pitch they're on? That's obviously up to the band director. But when I did my student teaching, this is the obligatory name drop, okay? But when I did my student teaching with Darren Davis at Broken Arrow, he didn't, what he would do is he'd have students do concert F around the room. And everyone would get on that pitch, and then he'd have sections intentionally raise the pitch or lower the pitch so you could hear the waves. And then they would eventually work to get those waves where they were rounded out and then gone and a nice even sound. He did that every day. And from middle school through, at that time he was teaching in the intermediate high school, which was 9th and 10th grade. Did that almost every single day, even during contest season. So tuners on the stands, totally optional. If you want to do that, that's great. But it's not going to replace, all right, everyone play concert F and let's just match pitch. That's that. So my personal take on this is that's something that I think band directors could do a lot more of. For lip slurs, about the sequence of order, well, for like trumpet, we're going to basically start from that sequence of F to B flat. Lip slurs are way easier to teach going down, okay? So don't start trying to teach a lip slur by going up to the next note. That's much harder. So you're going to start on a note and go down. One of my favorite tricks for teaching lip slurs is to actually teach a kid to kind of essentially like glissando down. So they're going to be like, ba, then it'll just like fall to the next note, and let them like try to play in that area where there's that slip, that area where it's like, they're barely holding on to the concert F before it falls through. And when they feel that little feeling, there's a feeling with that response we get in our aperture and our embouchure that tells us it's close. That starts to kind of, that's what it feels like. And then that lower note just kind of pops out. And then once you get that feeling, it's not super hard to reverse it to go up. So I would start on your standard, F to B flat, and then once you get that down pretty well, then you'd work on going B flat to F, and then of course you can then do the B flat in the staff down, and so on and so forth. Introducing teaching tonguing. This needs to be pretty early on. I would honestly I'm curious what everyone else's opinions are. When I've taught trumpet, I always taught tonguing in the very beginning. Mainly because I was always concerned about the student who would start without using the tongue, and then they would start becoming very adept at using their glottis to stop and start the air, and that can be really hard to catch. So I've used the classical technique of telling students like, hey, act like you've, which this is not COVID-19 friendly, but act like you've got a watermelon seed or a piece of rice on your tongue or a hair, and you're trying to spit it out. That's a great way to begin tonguing. Now, if you notice, if you do that, your tongue is actually touching the lips, but it's a great way to begin it. Now, as they get more accustomed to that feeling, then you can move the tongue up towards where the teeth and gums meet. But a lot of professional players, and I guess I'm speaking mainly of trumpet here, but they learned to tongue that way. And there's a couple of advantages to it, but one of them is that when you do that, it basically directs the air right to the aperture. And it reminds the embouchure where the aperture is every time. It's right there. It's right there. And it gives it a nice focal point. So I think that's a really, really good way to do it. When to teach students how to oil and grease slide and valves. That should be from the very beginning, pretty much day one. The Maintenance Monday thing has been mentioned. Definitely, a Maintenance Monday practice is a great way to do it. If there's anyone watching this that doesn't know what Maintenance Monday is, shoot me a message and I'll send the info to you. That's something that Paul Schmidt came up with. It's really great. What about giving the instrument baths? Okay, a little bit controversial here too, and this will sound like, I'm trying to plug my store, but I'm not. But I would not teach kids to bathe their instruments. There's all kinds of terrible things that can happen when kids do this. If they're renting an instrument from us, 99% of rental customers have our service plan, and all the cleaning and stuff is included. So just let us clean it. What I would teach them is how they can flush out their instrument, literally by just going to the sink. If they got a nice big kitchen sink or the bathroom, they can run water down the bell, work the valves, and just flush water through it. And then using the snake that came with their accessory kit and snaking out the lead pipe. Pull the tuning slide, snake out the lead pipe. And then when you oil valves, this is, again, I got this from Ronald Rahm, who is the trumpet player, one of the trumpet players from Canadian Brass forever. But when you oil the valves, pull the first slide and squirt oil down that into the first valve casing. Put the slide back on, pull the second slide, squirt some oil in there. hold the instrument like that, work the valves, the valve will descend into the third valve. And the reason for doing that, when you pull the valves out, all kinds of bad things can happen. Kids can drop the valves, they can cross thread the threads at the top, you could get dirt or other things inside the valves. Terrible things happen. You don't need to do it that way. I've been playing for like 30 something years. I oil my valves the way that Ronald Rahm does. If it's good enough for him, it's going to be good enough for me and for your students. Think of a range of a beginner. I would say you really want beginners starting on concert F. I don't like the idea of starting them on like if we're thinking trumpet pitch, starting on G or even C in the staff. They're starting on low C. They're just starting way, way, way too low. So they need to start that. And similar for trombone and horn. By the end of the first year of band, they should be able to play at least to the C in the staff or concert B flat that's above the staff if we're thinking trombone. It should be at least played to that, probably even to D or concert C above. By 7th grade, they should be at the top of the staff for trumpet, so they should be F or G. And by 8th grade, they should be between G and high C, somewhere right around there. And again, that's for trumpet, so trombone, move that whole step down, F to B flat, right around there. Ratio, I'm going to leave that to band directors to say, because I don't really know. What things should a student know before going to high school band? I think there's a couple things. Obviously, they need to have the basic mechanics of their embouchure down. They need to have basic tonguing down. They should know half dozen of the most popular major scales. They should know probably 3 of the corresponding minor scales that go with it. They should know the chromatic scale. I think if they have that and their fundamentals down with the embouchure, most high school directors are going to be thrilled to have those kids. That's going to take a lot of work off of their plate because they're going to have the basics down. One last thing of when I show kids embouchure or trumpet embouchure, I always start with just a very simple kind of version of lip buzzing. And so what I just tell them to do is hey, take a nice big breath and just go like that. And if they do that, then they are way more likely to be starting around that concert F page or spot on the page. And I have some kids, when I do play testing, I have some kids that will play, if I'm doing play testing for trumpet, their first notes will be a C, E, or maybe even a G above the staff doing that. I would much rather have a kid start up there and then I work them down than try to do it the other way. One other tip I'm going to show you real quick, and for this I'm going to grab my horn. I'll be right back. So when I play test students, I don't give them the full trumpet because it's too, I give them the whole trumpet, but I don't have them try to play the trumpet necessarily because it's too complicated. I also don't like them playing just the mouthpiece because playing the mouthpiece is harder and more difficult than playing the trumpet. So what I do is I pull the tuning slide, and at this point, we just have the mouthpiece and the tuning slide, and the valves don't work. And so it doesn't matter. In the very beginning when I'm play testing, I don't even teach them how to hold it because at this point it's not relevant, right? I'm just trying to decide can they get a buzz. I tell them to go, they'll do that a couple times, and then I'll tell them, all right, do that into here. And I'll demo that first so they know the sound they want to get, and I'll tell them, you're looking for a sound something like this. Or either one of those sounds are fine. And you'd be surprised, I would say, about 10% of them will give me that top pitch. If they give me that high pitch, then I tell them they're playing the trumpet. I don't care if they want to or not. Because that's not an easy thing to do. But by doing that pitch is actually about a concert E flat. So it's about an F, right below the trumpet G. That's our great starting point for trumpet. So I found using that technique for trumpet is a great way to teach embouchure from the very beginning and kind of get them acclimated to see if it's a good fit. Hope all this stuff helps. And great questions, by the way.